The sky hadn't fully brightened when Ethan Miller stepped into the cold corridor of St. Mary's Hospital. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, still half asleep, casting a pale, washed-out glow that draped everything in a muted silver gray. Seattle was still drowning in morning mist, and here, in the stillness of dawn, the heart of a man was trembling, not from the chill seeping through the drafty hallway, but from a fear he couldn't name. Ethan's footsteps echoed softly against the tiled floor, yet each step felt like it dropped straight into his chest, heavy, suffocating. In his hand was a small DNA test receipt, flimsy and weightless, yet capable of shattering an entire lifetime. He hadn't slept the night before, only sat at his desk, staring at a family photo. Aiden perched on his shoulders, arms around his neck, smiling bright as summer sunlight. A smile Ethan had always believed was the most precious gift life had given him. And now, he was here. Standing in front of the lab door, waiting for confirmation of the fear that had hollowed him out from the inside. The terrifying possibility that his son might not be his. He clasped his hands together, knuckles turning pale. His eyes skimmed over the empty waiting chairs. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner and the soft scribbling from the admin desk down the hall broke the silence, like a clock steadily counting down. Counting toward the moment when his marriage, his trust, his family, everything he'd built, might collapse. The door opened. A young nurse stepped out, holding a stack of documents. She looked at him with mild surprise, maybe because he'd arrived too early, maybe because tension clung to him like frost. "Mr. Miller, you're here for the results?" Her voice was gentle, but to Ethan it landed like a shiver down his spine. He rose to his feet. His lips parted, but he couldn't speak. He only nodded. The paper was handed to him. Ordinary, white, thin, far too calm for the devastation it contained. His hand trembled as he unfolded it. His eyes scanned the cold clinical lines, the indifferent numbers, the scientific terms he had Googled desperately for days. Then he saw it. One line, one conclusion. A single sentence that struck like lightning through a dawn that hadn't even woken. Probability of paternity, 0%. No genetic relationship. Ethan's chest tightened violently. Air vanished. The long corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, darker, colder. He turned away, gripping the edge of the paper as if he could squeeze the truth out of existence. As if this were only a nightmare he could force himself awake from. But the words remained, clear, merciless, final. A harsh breath escaped him. He staggered back, one hand braced against the wall. Something inside him broke open, an urge to scream, to rip the paper apart, to flee from this place, this truth, this version of himself that felt like he was dying. The nurse took a step forward. "Do you need—" He shook his head instantly, swallowing everything again, deep into the place that already ached. He didn't remember how he walked out of the hospital, through the glass doors, into the fog-soaked morning. But when cold air struck his face, the pain ripped further. He thought of Aiden's smile, the little boy's "daddy" every evening when he came home, the tiny arms around his neck before bed, those memories, once soft and warm, now stabbed into him like needles. Ethan clenched the paper, hand trembling. He whispered, to no one and to himself, "Why? Why is this happening?" In the distance, the morning sun began to rise behind a line of buildings, brushing the damp leaves with a faint golden glow. A new day for the world. But for Ethan, this dawn didn't begin anything. It ended everything he had believed in. And he knew, within hours, he would have to face Madeline. Face the questions that had no answers. Face the storm, waiting to tear their life apart. Ethan returned home in the freezing morning air. The DNA results crumpled in his fist, though the brutal words still refused to disappear. The cozy house that had held 7 years of marriage, 7 years of warmth and laughter, felt unnervingly silent. Golden morning light streamed through the windows, gently illuminating the family photos lining the walls. Ethan didn't dare look at them. They felt like memories that were bleeding. Madeline was in the kitchen, her back turned, pouring milk for Aiden. Her blonde hair fell softly behind her shoulders, the quiet domestic scene so peaceful it made Ethan's throat tighten. Just hours ago, he had intended to reassure her, to tell her that the DNA test was only a formality, that he trusted her completely, but now that trust was crumbling inside him, piece by excruciating piece. He stepped in. His footsteps made her turn. She smiled warmly. "You're back early? I thought you couldn't get the results until noon." He didn't answer. He simply held out the paper. His hand shook. Madeline's smile slowly faded. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked toward him, unease rising in her eyes. "Ethan, what's wrong?" He placed the paper on the table. It fluttered lightly, as if it were harmless, but its meaning crushed the air in the room. Madeline leaned forward to read it, and in the next second, her lips parted, not to speak, but because she had forgotten how to breathe. "No. No. This must be wrong," she whispered, voice trembling. "No, Ethan. This has to be a mistake. This can't be real." Ethan looked at her, torn between pain and anger, love and something darker. Emotions collided inside him like a storm. He wanted to be calm, God, he wanted to. But the 0% kept stabbing at him like a hooked blade. His fingers tightened on the edge of the table. Suddenly, without warning, he exploded, a raw, broken sound tearing out of him, so loud and anguished that Madeline flinched. "Why?" Ethan roared. "Why is Aiden not my son? Tell me, Madeline, tell me why!" Aiden peeked from the living room, startled, wide-eyed. Madeline instantly grabbed him, holding him close, protective. Her eyes glistened, voice shaking. "Ethan, I never cheated on you. Please believe me, not once." "Then why is the result like this?" he shouted, stepping closer, voice cracking. "You say you never betrayed me. You say you're innocent. But this paper says the opposite. What do you want me to believe? What am I supposed to trust now? You, the test, myself, what?" Madeline cried harder, tears falling onto Aiden's hair. "I don't know. Ethan, I don't know. I swear to you. I swear on everything. I never betrayed you." Ethan buried his hands in his hair, desperate for reason, desperate for air. But then he saw Aiden, clinging to Madeline, confused and afraid. The sight tore him apart. The child he loved with his entire being wasn't his. The room tightened around him, suffocating. He turned away, bracing himself on the table, trembling. "I don't understand," he said quietly, voice thick with defeat. "I don't understand how this is even possible. But I can't pretend nothing happened." Madeline shook violently, crying as if she were falling apart. "Ethan, please, please believe me one last time." But Ethan said nothing, and that silence, cold, merciless, cut through her heart deeper than any accusation. A family once solid as steel was now cracking because of a single fragile sheet of paper. The innocent question silenced the entire room for several seconds, only a few seconds, yet enough to shatter Madeline's heart once more. She held Aiden tightly, her voice breaking between sobs. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong at all." Ethan watched them, and for the first time since morning, he felt his chest tightening painfully, as if an invisible hand was crushing his ribs. He wanted to go to Aiden, to pull him into his arms and say, "No, son, you didn't do anything wrong." But his legs refused to move. The pain, the doubt, the devastation inside him felt like chains binding him in place. At the end of a long day filled with tears and exhaustion, Robert delivered the verdict that dropped the room into a deathly silence. "Ethan," he said firmly, "you cannot live with someone who has betrayed you. You can't. Divorce her. The sooner the better." The words fell into the air like a cold blade slicing clean through it. Madeline clutched Aiden even closer, her tear-soaked eyes fixed on Ethan. She did not beg. She did not protest. She only looked at him with a pain so deep that it felt impossible for any human to suffer twice in a lifetime. And Ethan, in that moment, felt his heart fracture along a long, deep line that could never be repaired. He didn't agree, but he didn't refuse either. His silence was the cruelest answer of all. After Ethan and Madeline officially divorced, the Miller home, once filled with laughter, became an echoing void of cold emptiness. Every wall, every corner still held traces of old happiness, yet everything now felt hollow and painfully unfamiliar. Ethan lived in a new apartment, spacious but freezing, where there was no childish laughter, no soft voice calling "Daddy," no little footsteps running across the floor. He grew quieter than anyone had ever seen him. He still went to work, still completed his tasks with machine-like precision, but his eyes were empty. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. He ate quickly, read the newspaper without truly reading, while his mind spiraled through a maze without exit. "Aiden, my son, where are you? How is your mother? I've lost my entire family." Deep down, Ethan still loved Madeline, loved her so much it hurt. Hurt to imagine her beside someone else, hurt to think she might be suffering alone without him there to share it. But trust had shattered, doubt had eaten away at everything. And he knew love alone wasn't enough to bridge the gulf between them. Ethan asked himself, again and again, was he still a good father if he no longer saw his son every day? Would Aiden still call him daddy like he used to? Each question cut deeper, sharpening into knives that carved his heart raw. He lost sleep, couldn't focus, sometimes feeling like he might collapse right there, at his desk, on the street, anywhere. Madeline was no better. After the divorce, she moved into a smaller apartment, simpler, quieter, where every curtain and table corner reminded her of what she'd lost, the man she had loved, and the little boy who once clung to both parents at once. She stayed up late, eyes swollen, hands trembling when she held Aiden. Every time he smiled, her heart both melted and twisted because she knew she could no longer give him the complete, safe world he once had. Aiden felt the distance too. At 4 years old, once full of energy, he grew quiet. He clung to Madeline's shoulder, hesitated when video calling Ethan. When they met, he no longer ran into his father's arms. For Aiden, divorce was not a word. It was a wound. A hollow feeling he was too young to understand. He wondered silently, why isn't Daddy here? Why is Mommy crying? Did I do something wrong? Both families were torn apart by the aftermath. Ethan's parents remained firm in their belief that Madeline had deceived their son, though they'd never seen any proof. Elaine watched Ethan fade behind a cloud of loneliness, while Robert finally realized he could no longer control his son through anger. Ethan had chosen silence. Meanwhile, Madeline's parents struggled too. Henry Carter, once fiery and hot-tempered, finally understood that rage couldn't fix anything. Elise spent most of her days helping Madeline and Aiden, trying desperately to fill the void in the little boy's heart. But every day she watched him grow quieter, more fragile, and her own heart ached as if it were being crushed. Emily, Ethan's sister, became the only bridge between two fractured worlds. She visited Aiden, brought toys, tried to coax smiles from him. But even she saw the fear behind his half-hearted laughter. And she understood now. Divorce wasn't only the sorrow of adults. It left scars on children too. Time passed. Ethan tried to rebuild himself. He jogged early in the morning, lingered with a cup of coffee on the balcony, watching the city wake. In those quiet moments, he thought of Madeline, of Aiden, of everything he'd lost, and everything he'd never done enough of. Every breath, every step, was a reminder that even if the past couldn't return, he could still choose how to live forward. Madeline found comfort in her work. She returned to teaching, pouring her heart into her students, children she could guide and protect. She kept a journal every night, writing down her days, her feelings, her moments with Aiden. He became the center of her small universe, and she learned to love again, not dependent on Ethan, but as a mother determined to stand strong, even if her heart still throbbed with pain whenever she thought of him. Aiden, little by little, adapted. He knew Daddy wasn't home anymore, but through video calls and little surprises Ethan sent, he felt love in a different form. He began talking about his feelings. He began to laugh again, sometimes, when Ethan read him bedtime stories through the phone. Both families, despite the tension, slowly learned to accept reality. Robert stopped attacking Madeline. Elaine stopped blaming. Henry and Elise let Madeline choose her own path. Emily continued quietly mending the cracks. One evening, Ethan stood on his balcony as the city lights shimmered below. A soft breeze brushed past, and he closed his eyes. He thought about Madeline, her laugh, their walks with Aiden, the sound of their son playing in the yard. The pain remained, but something inside him began to shift. He realized that love didn't always require possession. He could still love his son, still care for Madeline, without needing to hold on to the old life. Madeline had similar moments. Watching Aiden sleep, his tiny hand resting on hers, she felt an ache that was both painful and warm. She knew Ethan was no longer beside her, but she also knew they were still important parts of each other's lives. She whispered to herself, "We still have each other, in some way." Gradually, they learned to balance their new lives. They still loved, they still remembered, and they discovered that happiness wasn't about going back. It was about moving forward while honoring what once was. Days passed quietly, until one stormy afternoon changed everything. Aiden suddenly went pale while playing. His lips whitened, his breath quickened, and he doubled over, clutching his stomach. Tears streamed down his red cheeks. Madeline panicked, nearly dropping her keys while locking the door. "Aiden, tell Mommy. Where does it hurt? Sweetheart, talk to me." But the boy only sobbed, limp in her arms. She rushed him to the nearest hospital, running, crying, calling his name over and over. The world blurred. It felt like her heart was being torn apart once again. Divorce had already taken Ethan. Was fate planning to take Aiden too? Doctors hurried him into the emergency room, attaching IV lines and ordering tests. Madeline stood outside, trembling violently, gripping a damp towel with white knuckles. She had no one to call, no one but Ethan, and yet she hesitated. When the doctor finally came out, he led her to a consultation room. "We believe the episode was a mild hypoglycemic reaction," he began, "but there is something unusual." He laid out the test results. Aiden's blood shows two different antigen expressions, one consistent with blood type A, another with characteristics of type O. Madeline froze. "What does that mean? Is it dangerous?" "Not at the moment," the doctor said gently. "But this is extremely rare. We call it genetic chimerism, when a person carries two distinct lines of DNA. It can also be caused by other rare genetic conditions, and in such cases, paternity tests can sometimes produce inaccurate results." The air seemed to solidify. Madeline's heart constricted, her eyes widened, her throat dried. Those words, inaccurate results, pierced through months of despair like a fragile, impossible ray of hope. You're saying the DNA test could be wrong?" "In rare cases, yes," he confirmed. "If you have chimerism, your blood DNA may not match the DNA passed to your child. We need more tests to know for sure." Madeline stared blankly at him. A cold wave ran through her spine. Guilt, pain, hope, fear, anger, all surged at once, overwhelming her. If I really have this condition," she whispered, voice quivering, "then Ethan's test, it could be wrong?" "There is a possibility," the doctor said, "but we won't know until we test further." Madeline broke down, covering her face. All the accusations, the looks of suspicion, the lonely nights holding Aiden, the humiliation, the heartbreak, it all came crashing back. The doctor offered her a tissue. "If you believe there may have been a mistake, pursuing clarification is important." Madeline wiped her tears, looking at her sleeping son through the window. Aiden, the child she loved more than life, might also be the key to uncovering the truth. She stood, inhaled deeply, and for the first time in months, a faint, determined spark lit in her eyes. "All right," she said. "I'll do it. I'll go through everything. Not only for herself, but for Aiden, and for Ethan. Because if this was true, if the DNA test that destroyed their family had been wrong, their lives might take a completely different path, one they never dared hope for." When Madeline phoned Ethan to say Aiden had been hospitalized, Ethan felt his heart twist violently. He abandoned his meeting and drove straight to the hospital, ignoring speed limits, not caring about anything except his son. Since the divorce, Ethan had kept a respectful distance from Madeline, close enough to co-parent, far enough to avoid reopening wounds. But the moment he heard Aiden was in danger, every barrier disappeared. When he arrived, he saw Madeline curled on the waiting bench, trembling, face buried in her hands. The sight hit him like a punch to the chest, memories crashing in, grief flooding back. "Madeline," he whispered. She looked up, Her eyes were swollen and terrified, a fear for her child, the kind of fear he understood too well. Her voice shook. "Ethan, the doctor said, there's something strange about Aiden's blood. And they said, the DNA test might have been wrong." The words jolted through Ethan like electricity. He froze. His heart pounded. His eyes widened. In that moment, the world seemed to slow. Every wound, every doubt, every argument, every night Ethan had spent drowning in the belief that he'd been betrayed. All of it trembled on the edge of collapse. Ethan didn't speak. He only looked at Madeline, long and hard, as if sifting through every memory they had ever shared. The smiles, the laughter, the familiar warmth of her touch, the soft press of her hand in his. And in his eyes, Madeline saw something she had not dared hope for in months. He wanted to believe her. A small, fragile wall inside him crumbled. That night, Ethan barely slept. He lay on the narrow hospital couch, staring up at the ceiling. Every breath stabbed him with the same desperate question. What if it was all a mistake? What if Aiden truly is my son? What have I done? What did I lose everything for? The image of Aiden lying in the treatment room, his tiny body attached to IV lines, drove Ethan to the edge of madness. The boy he loved more than life, the child he had once held with trembling joy, now lay there pale and helpless, because of the choices Ethan had made. He hated himself, hated the weakness that had allowed doubt to poison the love he and Madeline had built, hated the fact that he never once stopped to question whether science could falter, whether rare exceptions existed, and above all, he hated that he had hurt the woman he once promised to protect. When dawn broke, Ethan made a decision. He had to know the truth, no matter what it cost, no matter what he had to face. The next morning, he returned to the hospital where the original paternity test had been performed. He didn't yell or blame anyone. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind that carried danger beneath the surface. "I want to review the entire testing process," he said. "Every log entry, every calibration, every chain of custody record, every technician's note, nothing left out." The staff hesitated at first, but one glance at Ethan's hollow, grief-stricken eyes told them this wasn't just a complaint. It was a man fighting for the remains of his family. They handed him a stack of reports and documentation. For 3 straight hours, Ethan read through every line, every timestamp. He wasn't a geneticist, but he was sharp, rational, and painfully motivated. Patterns began to emerge. Aiden's sample had shown unstable reactions and required reanalysis. The testing machine had been recalibrated mid-shift. The technician on duty had recently been transferred and was working a night shift. None of it was definitive, but together it painted a picture that made Ethan's skin prickle. Something was wrong. He left the hospital feeling both terrified and strangely hopeful. Just a sliver, but enough to light a faint glow in the darkness. From there, Ethan sought answers relentlessly. He visited one of the most advanced genetic laboratories in Massachusetts, known for deep-dive DNA sequencing capable of analyzing multiple tissue types, buccal cells, hair follicles, nail samples, even epithelial cell DNA fragments. When Ethan carried Aiden into the lab, the little boy wrapped his arms around Ethan's neck, resting his head on his father's shoulder. The familiar weight nearly shattered Ethan. He studied Aiden's face, the deep blue eyes, the gentle smile, the small tilt of his head when thinking. So many details, so painfully similar to his own. Ethan touched the boy's back, whispering in a voice already breaking, "Daddy is sorry. If you're truly mine, I've failed you in ways you didn't deserve." Aiden didn't understand. He only hugged Ethan tighter. After submitting the samples, Ethan's search led him to a renowned MIT geneticist, a leading expert in chimerism and mosaicism. The professor's office was small but cluttered with books, scattered notes, and colorful DNA models dangling from the ceiling like suspended constellations. Ethan told him everything. Not just the science, not just the error. He opened the wounds he had hidden from everyone else. He spoke of the marriage, the divorce, the sleepless nights, the guilt, the ruin. When he finished, the professor was silent for a moment, studying Ethan carefully. "You know, the professor began slowly. People once believed chimerism to be nearly impossible, a 1 in 100 million anomaly. But new studies suggest it may be far more common, just rarely discovered. Ethan's heart thudded. So, the original test could be wrong? Quite possibly, the professor replied. If the mother has chimerism or mosaicism, or if the initial sample came from tissue that doesn't reflect the DNA passed during pregnancy, the test could misrepresent the truth entirely. I've seen cases where a child was declared unrelated until testing from alternate tissues revealed the opposite. Ethan felt the world pull at his knees. Half of him surged with hope. The other half trembled with fear, because hope, after such devastation, was terrifying. The professor leaned forward, tapping a photo Ethan had brought. I studied your son's facial structure, bone proportions, eye spacing, even his epicanthic fold align more closely with your features than you realize. Frankly, if the new test confirms this visually supported resemblance, I wouldn't be surprised. Ethan's hands closed into tight fists. His shoulders trembled. Do you think I've been wrong? The professor's expression softened. I think you were hurting so deeply that you couldn't see anything clearly, and that is something every human is capable of. The following week was excruciating. Ethan moved through each day like a man suspended between hope and torment. He didn't mention anything to Madeline. Not yet. He would not give life to even a whisper of hope until he knew. Truly knew. Every night he video called Aiden, watched the little boy show him toys or babble stories. Ethan smiled, listened, laughed when he could, but inside, he felt his chest quake with each familiar gesture. Then, on the 7th day, his phone rang. Mr. Miller, the lab technician said, we have the results. Ethan stood so abruptly, his chair scraped the floor. His heart pounded so hard he could hear the blood rushing in his ears. He stepped to the window, staring out at the pale gray sky. Tell me, he said, voice hoarse. There was a pause. Then, the extended DNA panel confirms that Aiden is a complete genetic match to you. No errors, no discrepancies. There is no possibility of a mistake. Ethan said nothing. He couldn't. His entire world detonated around him, not in pain this time, but in overwhelming, staggering revelation. Aiden was his son, his flesh, his blood, his child. Every happy moment had been real. Every memory had been true. Every tear Madeline shed had been justified. A massive weight fell from Ethan's chest, and in its place, a tidal wave surged through him. Guilt. Crushing, suffocating guilt. He had doubted her. He had walked away. He had torn their family apart. He had made Madeline cry until she couldn't cry anymore. He had forced their son to grow up in 2 households, all because of a flawed test. Ethan braced himself against the table, lowering his head as tears spilled freely, raw, unrestrained, heartbroken tears. Not the tears of a strong man, but the tears of a father who finally understood the magnitude of what he'd done. And the tears of a man who realized he had destroyed the only woman he had ever truly loved. His fingers trembled as he reached for his phone. He dialed Madeline's number, missed once, corrected it slowly, and pressed call. 1 ring, 2, 3. She picked up. Ethan. Her voice was soft, tinged with worry. He inhaled deeply, closing his eyes. Madeline. Where are you? At home. Why? What's wrong? He exhaled shakily, his voice cracked open, fragile as glass. I have the results. Silence stretched between them, long, breathless, impossibly heavy. Then, with his heart in shreds, Ethan whispered, Madeline, Aiden is my son. He's really my son. That afternoon, the Seattle sky wore a thin veil of silver gray, like a soft scarf drawn across Lake Union. The city moved on, cars passing, children laughing at the neighborhood playground. But in Ethan's mind, all sound had dimmed to a distant hum. He walked slowly along the path leading to Madeline's building, the very same walkway he had once taken with a heart full of love, and later with a heart bleeding from betrayal. Today he returned not to reopen wounds, but to finally close the chapter that had burned their marriage to ashes. In his coat pocket, he gripped the test results so tightly the paper had begun to crumple. Each step made his pulse hammer harder. Fear twisting inside him. Fear that Madeline wouldn't believe him. Fear she had healed in ways that no longer included him. Fear that everything had come too late. But he kept walking, because the truth could no longer stay buried. When Madeline opened the door, they simply stared at each other. No accusations, no explanations, no demands, just two people, two exhausted, wounded souls, standing face to face after surviving a war neither of them ever chose. Ethan spoke with a raw, gravelly voice. "I need to talk. It's about Aiden, about everything." Madeline froze, her hand tightening unconsciously on the doorknob. Behind her, Aiden sat on the carpet playing with a paper airplane he had decorated himself, his eyes carrying that strange mix of blue and amber that made people stop and stare. A long, heavy silence swallowed the room. "I'm listening," Madeline said, though her voice trembled as if she had been running through the rain. Ethan stepped inside. His breathing seemed heavier, as though every inhale came with weight. He placed a stack of papers on the table, but his fingers didn't release them. "I redid the test," he said quietly. "Multiple times, different hospitals. I even consulted a geneticist." He drew in a deep breath, his eyes reddened, and the results were the same. Madeline felt her heartbeat stop for a moment. She couldn't speak. "Aiden is my son," Ethan said, each word dropping like a stone onto the floor, echoing loud inside both their minds. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears immediately spilled. Not tears of hurt like before, but tears of overwhelming relief she never saw coming. Her knees gave way and she sank onto the couch, palms trembling violently. "Ethan, are you telling the truth?" He nodded, firmly, without hesitation. He unfolded one of the documents. "The doctors said I have a rare form of chimerism. When they tested my blood the first time, it didn't reflect my actual genetic makeup. They should have tested tissue, not just blood." Madeline shook her head, tears dripping onto her shirt like small broken stars. "Oh God, Ethan, everything we went through, all of it, because of a mistake." Ethan looked at her. In his eyes were anger at himself, regret carved deep like old scars, and a quiet, steady love, like a forest returning to life after a storm. "I doubted you. I made you suffer. Madeline shook her head quickly, placing a hand over her chest to steady her breathing. "No, I also failed. I couldn't explain anything because I didn't understand it myself. When you left, all I could do was hold Aiden and feel like the world was splitting apart." Aiden looked up at them with innocent confusion. "Mommy, are you crying?" Madeline wiped her tears, forcing a smile. "Mommy's okay, sweetheart. Just a little emotional." Ethan looked at his son, the child he had held, protected, loved as if breathing, and the child he had forced himself to walk away from because of one wrong piece of paper. Ethan knelt in front of him, his eyes softening like gentle rain smoothing the surface of a troubled lake. "Buddy," Ethan whispered, barely loud enough for the three of them to hear. "Dad has something to say to you." Aiden tilted his head. "Yes? I'm sorry." Ethan pulled him into a tight hug, surprising Madeline. "I shouldn't have been away. I should never have left you and Mom." Aiden blinked at him. "So, Dad's coming home now? I missed you." The words hit Ethan like a blade and a bandage at the same time, sharp but healing. He hugged Aiden even tighter. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere again, I promise." Madeline watched them, her hand over her mouth, shoulders trembling. All the nights she cried alone in the apartment, all the mornings waking up with swollen eyes, all the evenings picking Aiden up from school with a hollow ache in her chest. Everything suddenly felt lighter, not erased, but lifted. Ethan turned to her. "I don't expect forgiveness right away, and I don't expect us to go back to how things were overnight. But I want you to know, I trust you, and I will never let anything shake that again." Madeline lowered her gaze, fighting the tide of emotions threatening to overtake her. "Ethan, that means more to me than you think." The room grew silent, not with tension, but with something gentler. Something like two broken pieces slowly trying to find their shape again. Ethan picked up the test results and looked at her. We'll rebuild, slowly, carefully, the right way. Madeline nodded. I agree. Aiden wrapped his tiny arms around both of them. So, are you two done being sad? Ethan chuckled softly. Almost, buddy. Madeline stroked his hair. You made us stronger, sweetheart. Outside the window, faint sunlight broke through the usual Seattle gloom, like the sky itself finally letting go of a heavy weight. They didn't say anything more. They simply sat together. Three people once crushed by misunderstanding, now holding each other like they were gathering the broken pieces to build something new. And when Ethan gently squeezed Madeline's hand, she felt the one thing she had waited months for, not the return of a marriage, but the return of truth, of trust, of hope, planted like a fragile seed waiting for spring. That night, Seattle fell back into its familiar drizzle, the streets shimmering beneath the lampposts. After Aiden fell asleep, Madeline stood at the window, soft yellow light brushing her face. She looked tired, but finally at peace. Ethan stood a few feet behind her, close, but not too close. A short distance, but one that felt as long as the year they'd spent apart. Madeline, he said at last, voice low and rough, I owe you an apology, one I should have given long ago. She turned. Her eyes held no resentment now, only the quiet sadness of someone who had cried until she had no more tears left. I know. No, Ethan whispered. You don't. He swallowed. I'm not just sorry for doubting you. I'm sorry for walking away when you needed me most. I let fear drown out everything else. I didn't protect you. I didn't protect our family. His hands tightened at his sides. Leaving you. Every step hurt. But I still left, because I believed a piece of paper more than the woman who built a home with me. Madeline's voice cracked. And you think that didn't hurt me enough to disappear completely? Ethan shut his eyes. I know. And seeing you stand strong through pain I caused made me hate myself more. A deep silence filled the room. Madeline took a small step toward him. I never wanted to lose you, Ethan, but I had no choice. When the man I loved most looked at me like I was a stranger. Her voice broke. I wondered, if one day the truth came out, would we even have the strength to come back? Ethan looked at her with a mixture of grief and love. If you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I deserve to. She almost cried again. I don't need you to prove anything. I just need your promises. To stay promises. They will, Ethan said, placing a hand over his heart. I swear. Later they sat together and Madeline asked the question she'd been holding in her chest. Ethan, do you still love me? The answer stuck in his throat. Instead of words, he cupped her cheek and wiped a stray tear with his thumb. Not a single day passed when I didn't, even when I was broken, even when I tried to forget. I love you, so much that it scared me. Her breath trembled. I love you too, but love needs trust. And we lost it. Then we'll find it again, Ethan murmured. Just then, small footsteps echoed in the hallway. Aiden appeared, rubbing his eyes and holding his tiny pillow. Mommy, Daddy, I'm thirsty. They both laughed, soft and natural. Ethan scooped him up, fetched water, and wiped his mouth. Aiden hugged him. Daddy, stay here forever, okay? Ethan glanced at Madeline. She nodded. I'm staying, he whispered to Aiden. After putting their son back to bed, Madeline whispered outside the door. I don't want us to get back together just for his sake. Ethan listened quietly. I want us to choose each other, not out of obligation. Ethan nodded. I choose you, not because of Aiden, not because I'm guilty, but because when I wake up, the first face I want to see is yours. Madeline's eyes softened. In that case, let's start over. Slowly. Together, he said, taking her hand. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Ethan, come home. He didn't kiss her, didn't rush toward her. They just stood there, holding hands, wrapped in warm lamplight. Two people beginning again from honesty, not desperation. Outside, The rain had stopped. Seattle was quiet, but for them, it felt like the brightest night in years. When spring finally touched Seattle, the city softened. The air grew mild, the sky lighter, the faint scent of white plum blossoms drifting through the breeze. And in that quiet, gentle spring, their small family began to bloom again. One morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. Madeline was making coffee for Ethan, a ritual she had stopped after their separation. She found herself smiling as steam rose from the cup, a small gesture, but one that unlocked a door long closed. Ethan walked in, hair messy, still sleepy. He stared at the coffee she was pouring. "You made this for me?" Madeline blushed slightly. "Yeah, I just wanted to see if I still remembered." He took the cup, fingers brushing hers. "Tastes just like the first morning you made it." They both laughed. Aiden ran in with a toy car. "Can we go to the park today?" Ethan lifted him. "Of course, today is special." "What's special, Daddy?" Ethan looked at Madeline. "It's the day we start again." She smiled gently. In the days that followed, they built new habits, not excessive, not trying too hard, just learning how to be kind to each other again. Madeline returned to her work at the university library, writing in her journal during Aiden's art classes. Ethan balanced his engineering job better, coming home earlier, reading with Aiden, helping with dinner. At night, they talked. Not small talk, but real conversations about fear, pressure, sadness, and the silence that once tore them apart. Some evenings, they curled under one blanket, watching old movies they used to love. No rushing, no pretending, only healing. One night, Ethan asked, "Are you still scared?" Madeline looked at him. "Yes, but not as much. Because you're here." "I'll always be here," he answered softly. One weekend, at Gasworks Park, Aiden chased ducks while Ethan stood behind Madeline, resting a hand lightly on her back, as if that was exactly where his hand was meant to be. "Ethan," she whispered. "Yes? Do you think we could get married again?" The question hit him like a burst of light. He turned to her. Her cheeks were pink, but her eyes clear and sincere. "I've been waiting for you to ask." She laughed. "I just wanted to know what you felt." "If you want, I'll propose right now," he said. She folded her arms. "No need to rush." "I'm not rushing," he said, stepping closer. "I'm certain." She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, "So am I." They didn't kiss. They simply held hands, and it was enough. That night, Madeline told Aiden a story. "There was once a small family," she said softly. "They loved each other, but a big storm came and they got lost. One day they found each other again. Even though they had scars, they held hands and kept going." "Did they stay happy?" Aiden asked. Madeline looked at Ethan, who stood in the doorway watching them with a tenderness that warmed the entire room. "Yes," she said, "because after living through the storm, they finally understood the value of sunlight." Aiden nodded sleepily. "I like that ending." "Me too," she whispered. Ethan kissed Aiden's forehead. "Me three." After Aiden fell asleep, Ethan led Madeline to the balcony. The city glowed beneath them. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he murmured. Madeline leaned into him. "I'm not that strong. I just kept believing the door to my home would open again someday." He wrapped an arm around her waist. "And now you're standing in that doorway." Madeline closed her eyes, letting the warmth of him sink into her bones. Under the Seattle sky, peaceful at last, they learned the most important truth. Love is not perfect. People are not perfect. But choosing each other again, after everything, was not just a reunion. It was rebirth, a new journey, uncertain but hopeful. And this time, they would walk it together, hand in hand, as a family, healed, renewed, and rewritten by love that survived the storm.